Welcome to Deep Dive. This is part 3 of our deep dive into OBEs, or out-of-body experiences. Our sources for this deep dive are 3 YouTube videos with Samantha Lee Treasure, the author of the book Out-of-Body Experiences, Explorations and Encounters on the Astral Plane.
Ever get that feeling, where you just wish you could jump right into your favorite movie? Or maybe a TV show?
Yeah, totally escape into that world for a bit.
Well, it turns out for some people, that desire might actually be manifesting in some really unexpected ways. So today we're doing a deep dive into out-of-body experiences, OBEs. But we're looking specifically at this fascinating new trend that people are calling shifting.
Right, and it seems really tied into our screen-obsessed world, doesn't it? How all this media we consume might be shaping these very personal, internal experiences.
Exactly. And we're grounding this whole discussion in the research of Samantha Lee Treasure. She's a medical anthropology researcher who's really spent years digging into OBEs and related phenomena.
Yeah, her background's really interesting. She's an anthropology student at SO, University of London, currently based over in Busan, South Korea, I think.
That's the one. And she's been researching OBEs and also sleep paralysis since way back in 2013. She's given talks about it in places like Japan, Russia, the UK.
Wow, so she's really been exploring this internationally.
Totally. And she's got a book on the way, too, apparently, about technology and how it intersects with these kinds of, supernatural or maybe hallucinatory experiences.
Sounds very relevant right now.
Definitely. So our mission, really, for this deep dive is to try and understand how OBEs are being experienced now in this, screen age, particularly this shifting phenomenon.
And maybe what it all tells us about consciousness itself and, our relationship with all the stories and media we soak up every day.
Couldn't put it better. We'll be drawing from excerpts of her presentations and discussions on OBEs, shifting, and we'll touch on sleep paralysis, too, as it's often connected.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe comparing these newer trends with, traditional OBEs.
Good idea. Samantha's work really does highlight a contrast there, doesn't it?
It seems so. Traditional OBEs, the way she describes them, they often feel incredibly real, quite stable.
Yeah, people might report seeing, spirit guides, or sometimes those shadow people figures.
Right, or even deceased loved ones sometimes. But this shifting thing, it sounds like it's pulling heavily from fiction, from the stuff we watch.
Exactly. And OBEs themselves are popping up more in media too, right? Comics, cartoons, films.
Oh yeah, definitely more visible. And while academics have looked into OBEs before, the focus was often on, the self and the body. Trevor's work seems quite unique because she's really zeroing in on these encounters within the OBE, the figures people meet.
Which brings up a good question she tackles. Why even study these figures? Compared to dream characters.
Well, her point is that there's actually way less research on OBE figures, even though people often treat the whole OBE as something objectively real. Like they actually went somewhere.
Which is different from how we usually think about dreams, isn't it? More like, oh, that was just a weird dream.
Exactly. There's often this sense of objective reality attached to OBEs that makes studying the figures within them pretty important for understanding belief.
Okay, so for anyone listening who maybe hasn't had one, how does Samantha describe a typical OBE starting? What's it like?
Well, she outlines a couple of main ways it can kick off. One is starting from your normal, awake physical state.
And you get symptoms.
Yeah, these kind of exit symptoms. People report feeling vibrations, hearing strange noises, buzzing or rushing sounds, and then this sensation of floating, almost like detaching from the body.
And where do you find yourself?
Usually right there in your immediate surroundings, your bedroom, or wherever you are. And the key thing is it feels incredibly stable and realistic. Not fuzzy or bizarre like a lot of dreams. Even time seems to flow normally, linearly.
Okay. And the other way they start?
The other common way is emerging into an OBE, directly from a state of unconsciousness. So you might just suddenly become aware, floating near the ceiling, maybe looking down at your body.
Without remembering the exit part.
Exactly. No memory of leaving the body. This can happen when falling asleep, waking up middle of the night, during naps, even coming out of a dream, or, interestingly, an episode of sleep paralysis.
And what triggers them? Is it always something dramatic?
Not necessarily. It's actually a really wide range of things. Strong emotions are definitely a factor, stress, fear, but also intense joy or excitement.
Okay.
Meditation can trigger them, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. Drugs, trauma, certain medical conditions, even just really mundane, monotonous actions.
Like what?
Things like long-distance running, being in an accident, or even repetitive tasks like typing or driving for long periods.
Huh. So, from a more scientific perspective, what's the leading psychological explanation for why this happens?
The main model revolves around the idea that our brain is constantly building a model of reality, right? It relies on the most stable input it gets.
Okay.
But if our sensory input gets overloaded, or maybe there's not enough input, or there's contradictory information, the brain might switch to a kind of backup model.
A backup built from?
Built from memory and imagination. And because it uses those same systems that construct our waking reality, that might explain why the OBE environment feels so solid and realistic.
So realistic that people feel totally awake.
Often, yeah. Until maybe they notice something that's just off. A detail that doesn't fit. What Samantha calls a glitch in the experience.
It's worth remembering, too, isn't it, that OBEs used to be pretty stigmatized, linked to, like, mental illness or occult stuff.
Absolutely. But Samantha points to research, even back in the 60s, like Celia Green's survey in the UK, that showed ordinary people have these experiences. People from all walks of life, regardless of their beliefs, and they don't always interpret them spiritually.
Now, Samantha also talks about this feeling of the eerie in OBEs. What does she mean by that?
She uses Mark Fisher's definition, which describes the eerie as something involving a sense of agency. But it's not clear what has the agency, or something being present when it shouldn't be, or absent when it should.
Okay, so like seeing things that aren't really there.
Or things you don't recognize, objects appearing or disappearing. She mentions one person she interviewed who saw strange red writing on her window during an OBE. Woke up, looked nothing there, couldn't understand it.
Wow, that really makes you wonder, what was that? Just your subconscious playing tricks?
Yeah.
Or something else entirely?
Exactly. And then there's that really strange phenomena where the person having the OBE sees other people who seem physically present, but those people can't see or interact with the OBEer.
Like you're a ghost.
Pretty much. Or sometimes, even weirder, the other person can see them, but reacts with fear, as if they're seeing a ghost.
Samantha interviewed someone, Treecar, who's had hundreds of OBEs.
Oh, yeah.
And she described it as being in this weird isolation zone. Not awesome or amazing, but more like feeling like a ghost yourself, like kind of detached and unseen.
But then on the flip side, people also report seeing figures who are clearly not physically present in the room.
And they can interact with these ones.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
It's like they're sharing the same mental or astral space. And the theories about who these figures are, they're all over the place.
Like,
could be past or future residents of the building, people from parallel universes, other dreamers, other astral projectors. Samantha even mentioned people trying to track down these figures on social media afterwards.
did it work?
Apparently not, so far. No confirmed connections made that way.
And it's not just people they see, right? Animals, too.
Yeah, pets show up, especially cats seem common, but also other things. Spiders are mentioned, including one rather memorable account of a giant blue glowing spider.
Okay, a blue glowing spider. Got it.
And then you get into folkloric figures. Spirit guides are quite common in some circles, but also rarer things like trolls or even the Yeti.
But it's not all friendly guides and glowing spiders. Samantha makes a point about the scary OBEs, too.
Right, the ones that get discussed less often, perhaps. Encounters with shadow beings seem quite prevalent in those accounts, often described as threatening, usually male in form, though some men report female shadow figures.
And aliens.
Alien greys also feature in some OBE reports, and experiences with them can range from feeling quite benevolent to being really quite frightening.
So if you look at all these interactions people have with figures during OBEs, what are the main themes Samantha found? How do these encounters usually play out?
They seem to fall into a few broad categories. Sometimes the figure makes the experiencer feel energized or even healed.
Okay, positive then.
But other times, it's the opposite, feeling drained of energy or even feeling attacked. Then you have figures that seem to be there to teach or guide. Others appear more like lost souls.
And the idea of meeting other travelers.
Yeah, that feeling of encountering other people who are also exploring these spaces, maybe from different times or different dimensions even.
The realism of it all must play a big part in why these experiences feel so significant.
Definitely. The realism makes them impactful. Samantha emphasizes it's not just the realism. Many people also report experiencing things like telepathy or clairvoyance during an OBE.
Like knowing things they shouldn't.
Exactly. She shares this story about her stepmother, who apparently had OBEs when she fainted or slept. Once, during an OBE, she saw her sister arrive home, noted details, and was able to confirm them the next morning.
Wow.
Experiences like that really blur the lines, don't they, between what we think of as internal imagination and external reality.
But it's important to say not every OBE is some huge life-altering event, right?
Oh, absolutely not. Some can be quite mundane, really. And while some people find OBEs reduce their fear of death, others, maybe after a scary encounter, might actually feel more anxious about what comes next.
Samantha even shared a funny story about her first adult OBE.
Oh, yeah.
Seeing some mysterious men in her flatmate's room. Her mom joked they might be Scientologists doing out-of-body spying because there were rumors about that.
Huh. That puts a different spin on it.
So this brings us to a really key question. What happens when fictional content pops up in an OBE? Like seeing a cartoon character or someone from a movie. How does that fit with existing beliefs?
Samantha outlines 3 main interpretations she's come across. The first is the idea of thought forms. Meaning that our thoughts, maybe individually, or even the collective thoughts of many people focused on the same character, can actually take on a kind of form or existence in these non-physical or astral realms.
Okay, so we kind of create them with our minds.
That's the gist of that theory. Then there's the idea of originals.
Originals.
This one suggests that maybe fiction writers aren't just making things up entirely. Maybe they're unconsciously tapping into entities, archetypes, or even beings that already exist, perhaps in parallel universes or other dimensions.
So seeing, say, Mickey Mouse in an OBE might be seen as encountering the actual Mickey Mouse entity.
According to that interpretation, yes, it's a pretty wild idea.
And the third one?
Shapeshifters. The idea that there are sentient beings out there that can change their appearance. They might choose to appear as a familiar fictional character, maybe because it's less alarming or easier for us to process.
Like in dreams, where you might just know someone is your friend, even if they look totally different.
Exactly, that kind of feeling. And Samantha notes this shapeshifter idea comes up quite a bit in OBE accounts generally, not just with fictional characters.
It's interesting, there's other research showing media content is appearing more in regular dreams too.
Yeah, anthropologist Robin Sharif observed that, especially among U.S. college students. Her theory is kind of intriguing. She thinks maybe our typical dream settings are becoming less vivid, more like muted stock location.
Oh, why?
Because we spend so much time physically present somewhere, but mentally engaged elsewhere, scrolling on our phones, in virtual worlds, our attention is divided. And this influence seems to be spilling over into OBEs as well.
And as things like astral projection become more mainstream, you get different interpretations popping up from various gurus or spiritual leaders.
Right. Some dismiss OBE figures as just hallucinations. The leader of Ekankar, a particular spiritual movement, suggests they are actually forms taken by the Mahanta, their term for a spiritual guide.
And some authors mention creating things in astral spaces.
Yeah, Tilly Swan touches on that briefly. The idea you could create even cartoon characters there, though she doesn't elaborate much. Samantha even mentions one OBE instructor who claimed to have seen Donald Trump during an astral projection.
Okay, well, moving on slightly. Samantha also shares a story from South Korea, a cautionary one.
About someone called Minjin.
Yes, who had a couple of OBEs when he was only 15, apparently due to some technique he and his friends were trying out. Samantha really warns against casually experimenting with these things, suggesting there are safer approaches.
That seems wise. It's powerful stuff. What about factors that influence the content of OBEs? Does it change?
Yes, her research suggests it changes in several ways. Firstly, within a single OBE.
How so?
An experience might start off feeling very realistic, very grounded, but then shift and become more dreamlike, or vice versa. It's also common, apparently, for an OBE to begin feeling kind of dark and dense, difficult to navigate.
Like moving through treacle?
Kind of, yeah. And then it gradually clears up, becomes brighter, and movement gets easier.
Interesting. What about changes over a person's lifetime?
Many of Samantha's interviewees reported that as children, they might have had OBEs, but didn't really see distinct figures, maybe just sensed a presence. But as adults, they started encountering more figures and having more meaningful, complex interactions, which mirrors how our regular dreams develop as we get older, right? They tend to get more complex.
Exactly. There's a parallel there.
And then there are the generational shifts.
Which seems like a huge factor now. Obviously, culture and religion have always shaped OBE content and interpretation. But Samantha argues that with our deep immersion in technology, media, fiction, OBEs are likely becoming even more influenced by these modern sources.
Finally, she distinguishes between spontaneous and deliberate OBEs. Does that affect the content?
Some studies suggest deliberate OBEs might be less accurate in reflecting the immediate physical environment compared to spontaneous ones. But Samantha adds a third category she calls the kindled OBE. Yeah, the idea is someone might try techniques to induce an OBE, maybe without success at first, but that effort might somehow kindle a tendency, making them more likely to have spontaneous OBEs later on.
Okay, and all this leads us to what seems like a major focus of her recent work, this generational shift and the rise of shifting.
Yes, shifting. According to Samantha, this really blew up, especially during the 2020 lockdowns.
And what is it exactly? It uses OBE techniques.
It uses methods very similar to astral projection techniques, things like deep focus, sometimes sensory deprivation. But the key difference is the intention. It involves deliberately trying to incubate an OBE with a pre-planned destination and narrative.
Through something called scripting.
Exactly. Shifters write detailed scripts outlining the reality they want to shift to, who they want to meet, what they want to happen. It's like writing a movie script for your consciousness.
And the destination is usually fictional.
Overwhelmingly, yes. The goal is to shift their awareness, their sense of self, into fictional worlds, often from popular TV shows, movies, books, video games.
You mentioned Harry Potter earlier.
Apparently, the Harry Potter universe was massive in 2020. A huge number of shifters were scripting experiences there, often specifically wanting to interact with characters like Draco Malfoy.
Why then? What factors came together?
Samantha connects it to a perfect storm, really. Heavy media consumption during lockdowns, obviously. Stronger emotional attachments or parasocial relationships with fictional characters because real social interaction was limited. And a growing interest in practices like astral projection and dream incubation that were circulating online.
And platforms like TikTok were key.
Huge. TikTok became the main place for shifters to share their experiences, their methods, their scripts, their successes and failures. It created a whole online community around it.
She shared that online exchange. Gen Z really said, "I hate it here," and left.
Yeah, and the reply, the government told us to stay home and we shifted to another reality, followed by, technically we are home to Hogwarts. It really captures that sentiment.
Some shifters saw it as a coping mechanism.
Definitely. Samantha spoke to some who described it as therapy, a way to cope with overwhelming global events, personal anxieties, isolation, especially when formal therapy might have been inaccessible or felt like too much of a burden to put on friends and family who were also struggling.
And it was more popular in certain places.
It seemed to correlate with stricter lockdown rules, more popular in Canada, the US, Turkey, France, UK, Spain, places like that. Less so, apparently, in Japan and Korea, where restrictions might have been different or maybe cultural factors played a role.
Who are the shifters, mostly?
Primarily teenage girls. That seems to be the largest demographic. But there are adults involved, too, and some guys.
And older generations are skeptical, calling it just dreaming.
Yeah, that's a common reaction. Oh, you're just lucid dreaming. But the shifters themselves often push back, pointing to experiencing classic OBE markers, like the vibrations, the floating sensation, the loud noises. Things they feel distinguish it from a typical dream, even a lucid one.
Samantha's take is quite nuanced, isn't it? Not just dismissing it.
Not at all. She proposes that these shifters have essentially crafted a bespoke, altered state of consciousness, one that's tailored to their specific cultural moment, their generation's needs, their deep connections with media characters, and their mental health landscape.
So it deserves proper study.
That's her argument. Instead of dismissing it, we should try to understand what it represents. She acknowledges the monetization angle, people getting views, offering paid mentoring. But her overall impression from talking to shifters was that many are genuinely having profound experiences.
A hybrid state of consciousness, she called it.
Yeah, potentially something that blends elements of OBEs, lucid dreaming, and maybe intense imaginative absorption. She connects it back to Susan Blackmore's work on the skills needed for deliberate OBEs.
What were those skills again?
Blackmore identified 3. First, being able to disrupt your normal sensory input. Second, constructing an alternative model of reality from memory and imagination. And third, being able to really attend to focus on that imaginary model.
And shifting practices line up with these.
Pretty neatly, yes. The meditation and focus techniques disrupt sensory input. The scripting and visualization build the alternative reality. And the deep absorption in the fictional world is all about attending to that model.
But not everyone can do it, right?
No, currently not. Success rates vary. Samantha suggests this could relate to cultural kindling, the idea that certain altered states become more accessible or catchy within a culture.
Yeah.
And also individual biology. Some people might just be more naturally predisposed or require different techniques.
She also made that interesting point about generational differences in engaging with media.
Yeah, comparing older generations with limited TV channels to younger ones with on-demand, immersive everything. Maybe older OBE experiencers were more likely to just sort of go where the experience took them, to some undefined space.
Whereas younger generations are more comfortable actively incubating a specific, known, fictional space.
That's the intriguing possibility she raises. It's a different relationship with media potentially leading to a different way of approaching these internal states.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly. Samantha also researched sleep paralysis quite a bit, and it connects to OBEs, doesn't it?
Yes, there's a strong link. Sleep paralysis, that state of waking up mentally but being unable to move physically, can often precede or follow an OBE, and they share some symptoms, like strange sounds or sensations.
Did she have personal experience with it?
She mentions having some herself, which she found more amusing than scary. Her brother had scarier ones, but apparently found the humor in them later. But it was actually the uncontrolled OBEs she started having after trying lucid dreaming techniques that really impacted her and pushed her towards studying anthropology. She found those quite unsettling.
And her research on how people talk about sleep paralysis online, what did that show?
A big theme was frustration, a lack of understanding from friends, family, even doctors. Unless a doctor specifically specialized in sleep medicine, they often didn't know much about it or how to help.
Which is concerning, especially given potential links to things like sleep apnea.
Exactly. There seems to be a connection there, particularly with obstructive sleep apnea. And anthropologist David Hufford, who studied sleep paralysis extensively, has warned that this lack of medical understanding can leave people feeling isolated and potentially vulnerable to misinformation or seeking answers from cults or gurus.
Samantha mentioned it's quite common in Korea and Japan.
Yeah, potentially linked to poor sleep habits in general. She also noted the stigma around mental health in Korea might make people hesitant to seek medical advice for something like sleep paralysis.
Is there a genetic link?
Potentially. There's research pointing to a variation in a gene called PER2, which regulates our sleep-wake cycle, being more common in people with sleep paralysis. Twin studies also suggest a genetic component, but they also strongly link it to recent stress and sleep deprivation.
So nature and nurture again.
Seems like it. Both biology and environmental factors like stress play a big role. Samantha saw this connection clearly in her work with refugees, noting increased sleep disturbances, including potentially sleep paralysis linked to trauma and anxiety.
She mentioned corona dreams, too.
Yeah, as an example of how collective anxieties manifest. During lockdown, people reported specific dream themes, lots of insects or big cats, which might have been influenced by the Tiger King phenomenon. Research by the Tavistock Institute using their social dream matrix also found common themes of being unable to go somewhere or relationship anxieties, reflecting lockdown concerns.
And media affects dreams directly, too.
Oh, for sure. Samantha shared her own striking experience after binge-watching a zombie series. She had this incredibly vivid dream, felt like non-REM lucid dreaming, where she fully identified with the protagonist fighting zombies. It made her question how well our brains distinguish screen fiction from lived reality.
Like those old stories of people fainting at the first sight of a steam train. New stimuli can be overwhelming.
Precisely. She also notes physical factors like being too hot or using heavy blankets can trigger sleep paralysis. She mentioned the underfloor heating in Korea, sometimes making it too warm.
So if someone experiences sleep paralysis, what can they do? What are the coping mechanisms?
The main advice is trying to stay calm, which is easier said than done, obviously. Remind yourself it's temporary and not physically dangerous. Trying small, focused movements, wiggling a finger or toe, moving your tongue, scrunching your nose, can sometimes help break the paralysis.
What about mentally?
Positive self-talk, deep, calm breathing, trying to focus on your actual surroundings rather than any hallucinations. It's generally advised not to struggle violently, as that often increases fear. And anecdotally, some people report their pets seem to sense it and wake them up.
What about supplements?
While things like 5-HTP might be mentioned in relation to serotonin levels, the standard expert advice, like from Matthew Walker in Why We Sleep, really prioritizes improving sleep hygiene first. And crucially, seeing a doctor to rule out underlying conditions like sleep apnea.
Samantha mentioned research on dream speech.
Yeah, fascinating work by Daniel Oldest, looking at micro-movements in the voice box during dreaming. It connects to that common experience in nightmares or sleep paralysis of trying to scream, but only a weak sound coming out. You feel like you're yelling, but the physical vocal cords aren't fully engaged.
And general sleep prep. meditations, affirmations?
Generally seen as positive. Other preventative tips Samantha gathered include journaling before bed, using a nightlight or eye mask if helpful, dietary changes for some people, cutting gluten, dairy, sugar, alcohol, caffeine, reclaiming the bedroom as a screen-free zone, pets for comfort, managing stress, avoiding naps if they interfere with night sleep, and tiring the mind rather than the body right before bed, like reading instead of intense exercise.
Nightmares can sometimes be part of therapy too, right? Processing things.
Yes, she mentions EMDR therapy as an example where processing trauma can involve difficult dream content. Interestingly, though, a Russian study found people with sleep paralysis reported fewer nightmares, possibly because sleep paralysis is often linked to lucid dreaming, which offers potential control.
The idea of transforming nightmares through lucidity.
Exactly, learning to confront or even befriend the scary figures. There's also that advice some give to try and look through any entities you perceive during sleep paralysis, treating them as projections.
Could the eye movements in EMDR trigger lucidity during sleep paralysis?
It's a speculative but interesting possibility Samantha raises. She also touches on the bigger question of whether dreams originate solely within us or from elsewhere, noting that belief systems heavily influence dream content, like in the Heichbon culture.
But there are counterpoints too, about negative experiences.
Right. Researcher Brendan Moore cautioned about potential downsides of certain lucid dreaming practices, like shadow work. It suggests different sleep states might have different potentials and risks. Samantha herself expressed caution about certain interpretations of OBEs in the unconscious.
And culture shapes the figures seen in sleep paralysis too.
Definitely. Historically, people might report local monsters or spirits. Now, with global media, we might see more widely recognized fictional entities appearing. The social simulation theory of dreams fits here too if dreams help us rehearse dealing with threats. Maybe sleep paralysis often presents social threats, which seem common in reports, rather than just primal fears like snakes, although those occur too.
She shared some vivid anecdotes. The air stewardess.
Yeah, experiencing sleep paralysis in hotels worldwide, sometimes with culturally specific elements, like seeing a particular kind of face and lizards in Indonesia, and the Korean student in London who saw a hovering Korean man during sleep paralysis there.
Waking hallucinations are quite common too, aren't they? Especially with sleep deprivation.
Very common. And our brains are wired to see faces and patterns pareidolia. It all feeds into the strangeness. Alyssa's story was interesting too. The childhood green goblin figure, very Western, then later experiences in different places, always seeing an identical room layout during sleep paralysis onset, feeling a strong presence.
Sleep paralysis seems to mix REM and non-REM features.
It does seem that way. Samantha suggested researching differences between episodes happening early versus late in the night might be revealing. Also, the link between sleeping with eyes slightly open and susceptibility to sleep paralysis is another area worth exploring.
And VR is entering the picture now.
Yes, research into using VR to induce or study lucid dreaming is growing. There's even potential for VR experiences related to sleep paralysis itself. Plus, the idea that you can consciously transition from sleep paralysis into a lucid dream, or OBE, is very empowering for many. There are techniques online, books about it.
Liz mentioned the vibrational state and trying to direct the experience.
Right, those vibrations are classic pre-OBE symptoms. And yes, trying to take control within the sleep paralysis state is a common goal for experienced individuals. Samantha also recounted those haunted hotel stories Rotterdam and Osaka with strange happenings coinciding with sleep paralysis or OBE-like states.
Someone experienced a VR simulation of sleep paralysis.
Yes, Sarah mentioned that. It shows how technology is actively trying to replicate and explore these states. The link between VR immersion and lucid dreaming seems strong too. The similarity between looking into a 3D virtual world and the immersive quality of dream space. Sarah felt VR use triggered lucid dreams for her.
What about time perception and culture?
Samantha touched on how our linear view of time might differ culturally, citing Germany as an example with a strong lucid dreaming research community. Studies there using TMS have shown frontal cortex activation during lucid dreams. There was even that crowd-funded lucid dream induction headband.
And recording dreams.
Research using brainwave analysis, EEG, combined with matching patterns to YouTube footage is trying to reconstruct visual dream content. It hints at a wild future of lucid dream filmmaking. Whether similar tech could capture OBE or sleep paralysis visuals is an open question. We do already have VR tech used for simulating OBEs or even meeting deceased loved ones.
Biofeedback in VR too.
Yeah, integrating things like breath control into VR. Initially for anxiety, but potentially applicable for inducing lucid states by linking physical calm to the virtual environment. And Samantha's plan to use a social dream matrix approach for sleep paralysis reports sounds fascinating, looking for collective patterns.
So bringing it back to shifting, it seems like a very modern phenomenon rooted in these older concepts, but adapted for today.
Absolutely. It's a new way of living vicariously, amplified by lockdown isolation, driven by deep emotional connections with media characters.
And it taps into dissociation, both as escapism and maybe coping.
Yeah, there are parallels. OBEs themselves are sometimes reported during trauma as a dissociative coping mechanism. Shifting could be seen as a more intentional, perhaps culturally sanctioned form of temporary dissociation or deep imaginative immersion.
With AI and VR getting more advanced, this could get even blurrier.
You have to wonder, yeah, AI generating personalized VR worlds or interactive narratives, how will that further blend waking life, altered states, and fictional realities?
Could shifting be seen as a modern way to connect with archetypes, like spirit guides, but using familiar fictional masks?
That's a really interesting interpretation. Like, the shapeshifter idea, maybe deeper patterns or energies, are presenting themselves in forms drawn from our current cultural mythology, which is heavily influenced by media. The example of the girl from The Ring being interpreted differently across cultures fits this.
And it can happen unintentionally too, right? After just watching a lot of something.
Samantha's zombie series experience suggests so. If you're deeply immersed, the lines blur, and your brain might not neatly separate on-screen worlds from its own internal landscape during sleep or other altered states.
Are there parallels with conditions like schizophrenia, creating characters?
There can be superficial similarities, like the vividness of internally generated figures, as depicted in A Beautiful Mind. But the context, trigger, often negative experiences in schizophrenia, and interpretation, medical versus spiritual experiential, are usually very different. It highlights that similar types of experience can exist across a wide spectrum, from pathology to sought-after states.
Samantha mentioned West African rituals resembling cosplay.
Yeah, the Breti rituals. Connecting, shifting to that deep human impulse for storytelling, embodiment, and imaginative play. Maybe it's a form of self-created narrative enactment that some people don't necessarily grow out of.
But there's a risk of losing touch with reality.
That's a valid concern, and one Samantha acknowledged from her own experience of having frequent OBEs and deciding to scale back intentionally to feel more grounded.
So why are people, especially young people, drawn to shifting? What needs might it be meeting?
It could be filling various gaps, perhaps a spiritual or meaning-making gap in a secular world, addressing deep feelings of isolation, navigating complex relationships, maybe a lack of strong community offline. It might even function therapeutically for some, like a personalized form of Jung's active imagination.
Can people actually control it, scripting real people?
Reports vary. Some claim successful scripting, others report failed attempts or unexpected deviations. The collective imagination seems to influence character behavior too. Scripting real people seems less common in reports, but it's often underpinned by a belief in parallel realities where such interactions are theoretically possible.
So is it just an OBE with fantasy overlaid?
That's one perspective, yeah. Like Zia's idea that astral worlds are partly constructed from thought. Shifting could be seen as deliberately shaping that thought construction process using fictional blueprints.
It's clear shifting is really novel, and we need to understand the underlying needs it's pointing to.
Absolutely. It tells us something about the experiences and desires of young people navigating today's world. So, to kind of wrap up our deep dive here, we've really explored how out-of-body experiences seem to be evolving in our hyper-mediated age.
Yeah, leading to this unique shifting trend that really mashes together media immersion, altered states, maybe coping strategies, and unmet needs.
And it sparks all these fascinating questions about what it is, why it's happening, and what it means for our understanding of the mind.
Which leads us perfectly to our final thought for you, the listener. As we dive deeper and deeper into virtual worlds, how is our very understanding, our experience of consciousness, going to keep changing?
Is shifting maybe a little glimpse into how future generations might navigate that increasingly blurry line between what we call reality and fantasy?
Definitely something to ponder. Think about your own relationship with the media you consume, and maybe your own inner world too.